It's not like we get together and go, okay, well, this is exactly how the morning is going to go. You just grab onto him, and then he decides to do stuff. And there's nothing we can do to force his hand. There's nothing we can do to, all we can do is respond, right? Like Colby so beautifully put. That he's speaking, and it's our responsibility is just to listen. That's it. You know, listening is probably the easiest and most difficult skill set. And we have multi-billion-dollar industries developed around people that would just listen. This makes you think. The easiest thing to do, yet the hardest thing, one of the hardest things to practice. So we just hold on to him. And it's just interesting, as the Lord was speaking to me about this morning and what he's doing, and I really felt like one of the things he wanted to do was set people free. And this is what's been happening, and Colby and I didn't like meet beforehand and say, okay, we're going to make sure that the Lord sets people free today. Because what you invite people into can only be the fruit of what he's done in your life. So you can't plan it beforehand. It's the overflow of what he's doing with you. So he breaks our own mindset. He breaks our own barrier so that you can invite other people into the same journey. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's just interesting. We're talking about this morning. It's the in the I Am series that we're on. It's I Am the Good Shepherd. There's so many things you could say about that. Like, I feel like it's not even fair that I have to sum it all up in one Sunday morning. But I really do think that what has been happening this morning and just what the Father's laid on my heart and then what I believe he intends to do, there's just this synergy because the Lord wants to do something. And he doesn't want to do something because we've earned it. He wants to do something because it's who he is. Some of you need to hear that. He doesn't want to do something with you because you've earned it. He wants to do something with you because he loves you. It's as simple as that. Okay, where are we going to go? So many things to share. I am the good shepherd. Let's just read the passage really quick. Not too quickly, because the Bible is something to be savored. John 10, and Colby, of course, spoke on I am the door, and he stole half of the message when he did that. But I don't blame him. And just right, it's because I am the door and I am the good shepherd are all within the same narrative that Jesus is telling. It's all the same sermon, answering the same question and talking about the same thing. And so we're just seeing another shade of that when we go through this. I am the good shepherd. Starting in verse 11. If I started in verse 7, I'd be back to what Colby was talking about. John 10, verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay my life down for the sheep. And other sheep I have which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice. And there will be one flock and one shepherd. Now, John 10 is a whole narrative structure that essentially ends with the people of Israel wanting to stone Jesus for saying, I'm the good shepherd. And unless we understand some of the things that he's actually saying and dig into the roots of what he's saying, it doesn't necessarily make sense to us that he would say, I'm a good shepherd. But it's like contextually, if you heard a great visionary leader come in front of a group of people and say, I'm a good leader, I look like the Father, and they said, we're going to stone you for that. If we have to understand the claim Jesus is making. And like a couple weeks ago when I was talking about Jesus as the resurrection and the life, and I read more Bible verses in a row than I think you've ever had read at you on a Sunday morning. But you needed to see the context for what Jesus was saying when he says, I'm the resurrection. Well, whenever Jesus makes these kind of statements, I am the shepherd, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, I'm the resurrection and the life, these kind of statements, you have to understand that he's making these statements as a Jewish man in a Jewish context. So we have to see the narrative that he's pulling from to understand the depth of the statement and how profound it is. And in Israel's history, there's a number of shepherd passages, looking at Jeremiah 23, Ezekiel 34, probably most famously, Psalm 23. So Jesus coming on the scene and saying, I am the good shepherd, immediately evokes these images. And even actually David, when he takes over the kingdom, he's called essentially the shepherd king. The man who went from a shepherd to a king. So you've got this narrative throughout Israel's history that when Jesus shows up on the scene and says, I'm the good shepherd, he is evoking imagery that they would all be very familiar with. In Jeremiah 23, let's see, Jeremiah 23, you don't really have to turn there. I just like moving the Bible around. Jeremiah's talking about, he's talking on behalf of God. It's a prophetic word. It's the voice of God. And he starts it off and he says, woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, says the Lord. So he's pointing out, like think about this, okay? He's pointing out false shepherds. Jeremiah speaking the voice of God. God says, woe to the shepherds who don't shepherd. Right? And then you just go just a bit, this is in Jeremiah 23, verse 3, just a couple verses down. I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I've driven them and bring them back to their folds, and they shall be fruitful and increase. So he's juxtaposing false shepherding with true shepherding. Right in the van. And Jeremiah goes on juxtaposing these things. And right after he does the shepherd passage, he talks about the false prophets versus true prophets. This is what the voice of God looks like. Ezekiel 34 does the exact same thing. Juxtaposing false shepherds. The chapter title in the New King James is Irresponsible Shepherds. And it says this in verse 1, Ezekiel 34:1, and the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, woe to the shepherds of Israel who feed themselves. Then if you jump down to verse 11, you have God saying, thus says the Lord God, indeed, I myself will search for my sheep and seek them out. So again, juxtaposing the two of them. Now, we see a number of narratives like this in the Old Testament. Juxtaposing true shepherding with false shepherding. And then if we again, we can look at multiple ones. I just encourage you to read Psalm 23 all over again. It's obviously a beautiful passage. If we jump right back to John 10 and revisit what Jesus is saying, verse 11, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, who is not the shepherd, one who does not owe the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep. So what's he doing right there? Juxtaposing false shepherd with true shepherd. Right? The exact same thing we've seen, Jeremiah 24:3, Ezekiel 34, the exact same thing we've seen in the narrative that God does when he speaks to the people. Jesus is saying the exact same thing. The big difference is that Jesus is a man standing right in front of them saying, I am the shepherd. Do you see how audacious the claim is in light of that? Israel's history, God says, I am going to be a shepherd to you. Jesus shows up on the scene and says, I'm that shepherd. This is what he's saying. So again, we've got a figure in Jewish history that crashes together. These assumptions and these thoughts about who God is crash together and come to clarity in the person of Jesus. I'm the good shepherd. So Jesus saying, the reason why it ends on the point of stoning is sometimes we want to anchor it on the statement he makes further down in John 10, I and the Father are one. Let's just look at it really quick, okay? Down further in John 10. Right in, the people get really mad at him, the Jews surround him. Verse 25, Jesus answered and said that I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. But you do not believe because you are not of my sheep, as I said to you. See, he's still on this whole train of sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall anyone snatch them out of my hand. You hear that? He's saying, I'm holding you. Nothing can take you away from that. Anyway, that should encourage some of you. My Father has given them to me. He is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him again. What a popular ministry. So oftentimes we read that passage and think the reason they wanted to stone him was because he said, I and my Father are one. That's part of it. The other part is he said, I'm the shepherd you've been looking for. This is another example of Jesus expressly claiming divinity. I am God standing in front of you. It's more than just saying I'm a tender leader, I'm a wise leader, all the things we would read into a shepherd. He's saying, I'm God who you've been anticipating all along, and I look like the Father. And here's the thing. Jesus is like the ultimate Rorschach test. Is that how you say that? Rorschach, I think? Rorschach, whatever. You know what I'm talking about? When they show the images to you, and you look at them, and they're like black outlines, and you look at them, and then you tell people what you see, and they're like, oh, you're weird because you see that? You know what I mean, right? Okay, with that, now that... Yeah, an ink blot. There you go. There you go, yes. So Jesus is an ink blot, okay? Because when they look at him, they read their own meaning into it. So they hear what he's saying, and they want to stone him. But some hear what he's saying, and they want to follow him. That's interesting. You know, sometimes when we go through this passage and this narrative of Jesus as the shepherd, because he says this phrase that really catches our attention, my sheep know my voice, right? And so we go through this, okay, well now we have to learn how to hear his voice, we have to spend time hearing his voice, cultivating an awareness of his voice, all this kind of stuff, right? We'll go through, and that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. We really want to be in that place where his voice is more and more familiar. Colby was saying he's been speaking and you're not listening. We want to be aware of his voice. But there's an interesting one here where he says, right in this narrative, he says, "Other sheep I have which are not of this fold." Now, we know classically he's talking about, classic interpretation, he's talking about the Gentiles, all of us that eventually are going to come in. But I want to point something out, that they're his sheep and they've never heard his voice. They didn't spend a lot of time trying to learn how to hear his voice. So the thing Jesus is saying is not so much spend the time learning to hear my voice. That's obvious, we should do that. We serve a God who speaks. Well, what's he saying? We can read all of Scripture and catch that. My sheep hear my voice is not a narrative that says, begin to learn to hear my voice. He's saying, because here's the thing that he's saying, like, look at, like, when he says to the disciples, like when he calls the disciples, he goes up in John 1 and he says, "Come and follow me." And they immediately respond. They throw down their nets and they respond and follow him, not because they'd cultivated an awareness of the voice of Jesus. They'd never heard him before. They had heard of him, but they'd never heard him before. "Come and follow me," and they immediately cast their nets down because his sheep hear his voice. Not because his sheep have developed an awareness to his voice, but because his sheep recognize that when he comes, he answers the desperate cry of my heart that I've been longing for. Not because I've trained myself, but because I recognize the deep need within me, and when he speaks, it goes, "Oh, that's what I've been looking for." It's like humanity has been preloaded to crave him. And he's saying, the ones that hear me, they're going to follow and drop everything to come after me. But there's ones that'll hear the voice, and they'll say, as in this narrative, "We want to kill you." And there's ones that'll hear the voice and go, "My heart's been longing for this." I just want you to hear this. It's not a training regiment to hear his voice, but a recognition that your heart is crying desperately for him. And he wants to reveal himself to you. It's his great pleasure to reveal himself to you. It's not his great pleasure to try and test you over many years to see if you can actually hear, and then to tease you with his voice. It's interesting how often we take a passage of Scripture where Jesus is talking about the nature of God and make it about ourselves. I want to What I want to do is look at, in the context of what we've been talking about, what Jesus lays out as the difference between a hireling and a shepherd. Because he's not, sometimes we read that, and I know even I'm reading it and going, "Oh, he's talking about a good leader versus a bad leader." And there's lessons to be learned for sure in there. But when he's talking about the hireling and the shepherd, he's the shepherd, right? So he's juxtaposing to the people what the true picture of God is and what the false picture of God is. The hireling versus the shepherd. Two distinct versions of what God looks like, of what the Father is like. And he says three characteristics of the hireling, and I would posit that these are three things that we read into the nature of God that destroy our ability to turn to him as a loving Father. He says the hireling sees the wolf coming, and so he runs when it gets hard. He flees and doesn't care about the sheep. So he sees the wolf coming and he runs. When he flees, he doesn't care about the sheep. 3 character traits. And he doesn't own the sheep. He doesn't know the sheep. So the hireling runs when it gets hard, doesn't take care of the sheep, and doesn't know the sheep. These are all distinct ways we read, distinct things we read into the image of the Father. That when things are hard and difficult in my life, it's him judging me. That he doesn't care about me. That he's not providing for me. That he's only, like I said, the sheep they don't own the sheep or know the sheep. So the Father is only passively interested in you. Really only for what you can do, not for who you are. See, the hireling is characterized by people who walk as orphans, not as sons. The hireling doesn't demonstrate great affection like the Father demonstrates great affection. It's a picture of what the Father looks like that's totally distorted and warped by a religious system. He looks like one who's disinterested, who doesn't care, who doesn't really know or care about all of your needs. And many of us grow up with an image of the Father that looks like that. And partly that's been demonstrated to us by leaders in our life, by our own parents, by the teaching that's surrounded our upbringing, whether in the church or not, by the culture, the dynamic that we're in, the society that we're in. You've got to work really hard. You've got to protect what you have. And you've got to make sure that no one takes advantage of you. Those are all distinct images of responding to the image of, responding to a broken image within us. I'm going to preserve my legacy, preserve my identity, protect my family name, protect my history, make sure everybody thinks well of me. These are all broken images that play themselves out when we see God as the image of the hireling. But that's why he comes in moments like this morning, because he wants to free us of that image that's stuck within us. This is what he's like, and so because this is what he's like, I respond to life accordingly. And I hold on tighter and tighter and tighter. And things slip more and more quickly from my grasp. But then Jesus goes on to say, you see it like this, but let me tell you what the Father's actually like. Let me show you. And he puts out 4 different marks, I think 4 different marks that characterize the Father as the shepherd. He says he lays down his life. So he's not self-interested. It's not all about him. God's condition for you isn't, come serve me, I want to take advantage of you. That's not who he is. He lays his life down for you. He doesn't go, okay, lay your life down for me and then we'll see what we can do with you. But many of us come that way, thinking that. I've laid my life down and God hasn't done anything with me yet. Well, he laid his life down for you. Maybe he's correcting and dealing with a way of seeing him that isn't commensurate with who he is. The second characteristic of the Father, or Christ as the shepherd, is that he says, I am loved by my Father. The nature of the shepherd as a good shepherd is love. We had many of us had fathers who were protective, supportive, and made the home financially stable. But they were still hirelings. They didn't know how to love and give themselves, and that impacts you. There's no indictment against them. Everybody grows up in a broken system. But Jesus is saying you have false images of what God looks like, and this is what he actually looks like. And when you see me, you see what he looks like, because I'm the good shepherd. He knows the sheep. Characteristic number 3, he knows the sheep. Yeah, that means not just like he's passively interested, but he knows you deeply and thoroughly. Everything about you, every movement, every moment. And he still calls you his sheep, even though you did all those bad things. One guy said God factored your stupidity into your destiny. He knows his sheep. Meaning, okay, think about this for a second, okay? I'm married. I've been married for a little bit of time now. Some of you have been married a lot longer than I have. 14 years. So I can say at this point, I know my wife. I'd hope, right? And the more I know my wife, I'm still interested in her. He knows you thoroughly and hasn't lost interest in you. He hasn't been turned away from you. My wife has seen all of my shortcomings, and I've seen hers, and I still am passionate and love her and look past those things. He knows you, and he never stops knowing. He doesn't go, well, that's enough. I'm tired of you now. And then characteristic 4 is that he's known by the sheep. So there's this offer to reveal himself. I said it already, God longs to reveal himself. He says he's known by the sheep, meaning he's the kind of person who wants to make himself known. You think about a marriage where your spouse doesn't want to divulge who they are, and it becomes a partnership rather than a union. That's hard. That's not what we see the picture here. The picture we see here is one freely given. He's like, I'll show you everything. He wants to be known. He's not withholding himself, going, well, you're not ready yet. Just try a lot harder. You see the expression of this care and tenderness. What the orphan mentality sees God as the hireling who's going to book it the first time we make mistakes. But the son sees the tender father who longs to lavish his affection. That's what Jesus is pulling out right here. This is my last point, I think. Maybe. I want to focus in on the word good. You could preach a whole year on that particular word. Because he doesn't just say I'm the shepherd. He says I'm the good shepherd. And there's last time I spoke on I'm the resurrection and the life, I brought into, we're looking at the rich young ruler, where the rich young ruler goes to Jesus and says, good teacher, and Jesus says, there's none good except for God. Why do you call me good teacher? But there's different ways that the word good is applied, because those are two different words in the Greek manuscript, the Greek text. And just to highlight the difference between those two things, you can look at a piece of art and say, man, that's a really good piece of art, right? And then you can look at someone who is feeding the poor and say, well, they're a good person. Those are two different ways of thinking of something. Good as a moral virtue versus good as a quality inherent to the thing itself. Right? The piece of art is good because of its appearance. The person is good because of what they do. Right? One's a quality of a person, one's a quality of a thing or a trait. So when Jesus here says, I'm the good shepherd, he's not talking about the word itself isn't talking about the moral quality of a thing or the intrinsic value of a thing. Like when the rich young ruler comes and says, good teacher. So he's not saying you're good-natured. I'm the good-natured shepherd. He's not saying anything having to do with being kind and virtuous or anything like that. The word good can be translated as beautiful or pleasant. So when Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd, he's not saying I'm morally virtuous. He says, when he says I'm the good shepherd, he's saying I'm the beautiful shepherd who you've been looking for. He's pointing out the attractive quality of who he is. I am the beautiful shepherd. If you come to me, you will never want for anything. Therein we see the beauty of God. Because when we encounter him, everything in us, like think about this, okay? Going back to Colby's message on I am the door. When the shepherd is laying, remember the shepherd lays as the door? And in the sheepfold, remember Colby talked about that? When the shepherd is laying there, the sheep are at total rest and peace, confident in the quality of the shepherd who's there protecting them. So the very presence of the shepherd to the sheep brings them to a place of peace. Because to them, when they see the shepherd laying there, that is a beautiful sight. So the presence of the shepherd is the thing, the very presence of him there is what goes, I can finally just be me and relax. That's the beauty Jesus is pointing to, that when he's present, you go, oh, I finally found it. That thing I've been longing for. And when he's present, we start to make this move from this orphan-like mentality that says God is disinterested to this adoption by sons and daughters saying, he's here with me and he loves me and I'm not even perfect yet. And when I recognize his presence, I'm at total peace with myself because I know he's loving me and he hasn't rejected me. And he's passionate about me. And he loves me. Now, I don't have to earn him being my shepherd. He just said, there's sheep that don't even know they're my sheep yet. But he knows they are. And the Father even says, Jeremiah 23 to Ezekiel 34, there's my sheep who have gone scattered. I'm going to find them. That's each and every one of you. So that this narrative isn't so much about, I've heard pastors teach on, well, sheep are dumb and they don't know what they're doing, and so we're sheep, and God's pretty good, so he comes and gets the sheep, but the sheep really don't know what they're doing. Like they make the whole story about the sheep, but the story's about the shepherd. Jesus is saying, this is what it's like. This is what he's like. This is what the Father's like. He looks past your brokenness. He looks past your inability. And he goes, that's something I can work with. Just a dirty, disheveled sheep, I can work with that. Let me lay right in front of you so you can find your perfect peace. I'm going to show you what it's like to belong to me. I don't run when things get difficult for you. I'm right there with you. I don't dangle a carrot in front of you and hope that you come into my pen. But I protect you in the midst of it. He's not good in the sense that he does good things to us. He's beautiful because when we see him, we find what we've been longing for. Now, this is the revelation that David carried in Psalm 23 when he said, the Lord is my shepherd. And then everything he said, everything about him was impacted because he saw the Lord as a beautiful shepherd. I shall not want. He leads me. He gives me rest. He restores me. So he heals me. He provides for me. He nurtures me. He protects me. When I catch a vision for how beautiful he is, everything changes because I can finally be myself without having to earn it in front of other people. I don't have to protect my family name. I don't have to protect my legacy. I don't have to grasp to the things I've earned. I can say, here, Father, they're yours, because I'm at peace to let myself go. The greatest expression of freedom was seen in the life of Jesus when he gave himself. It's not freedom to do, it's freedom to become like him that you might give yourself like him. And that's what it means to come into contact with the good and beautiful shepherd. He's laying right there protecting me, and I can finally express all that I am to the world without fear of judgment, rejection. I can be me. I can put the painting out in front and say, I love painting. You could be a terrible artist, but the Father doesn't care. He loves what you produce. The world might care, but when he sees you, he goes, that's my beautiful person who's expressing themselves as I've created them to. That's what it means, the good shepherd. Heather, you want to come up? Maybe the whole band can come up. This is what I want to do this morning, okay? Because when you read through the whole, you can read through the whole passage. But when you read through the whole passage, like I said, the ending is the Israelites want to stone him, and they say, man, I think this guy's listening to demons. It's an interesting response to this. But when you hear the message of the Father's goodness, that he could be just that beautiful, there's a thing inside of our hearts that does the same thing. We want to pick up a stone and say, there's no way. There's no way he could be that tender and affectionate. There's no way he could be that loving, not towards me. We have the same disposition that they had right there. There's an orphan in every one of us going, that applies to you, but not to me. He's good to them, but not to me. So we hear the good news, and we pick up a stone trying to figure out how to respond. So I think the Father wants to do business this morning. He's already been doing business. But the business he wants to continue to do is putting to death those old mindsets. I've got to work and earn and strive. I've got to protect and hold on and cling. I'm concerned about what people think about me. I'm concerned about what the next month will bring financially. I'm concerned about what my friends are going to do. And the Father's like, I'm laying right there. You can be a perfect peace because I'm going to take care of it all. He really is that good. May not always look like you think it's going to look, but he really is that good. So let this morning be a death blow to that picture and image of God that's twisted and distorted away from who he actually is. He's not going to be there when things get tough. He's not going to love me when I mess up. I can't tell people these things because they're too difficult for them to understand. The Father's right there going, I'm the one who's leading and guiding you. It's going to be okay. Let's stand. You know, if I'm speaking to you, and that picture of the orphan and the picture of the son is hitting your house, hitting the house of your heart, who you are. You're going, I want to move from here to here. I want to pray for you. I'm going to be here praying. Colby will be here praying. He's passionate about freedom too. Tracy will be here praying. Don't leave without doing business with the Father. Don't cling to old paradigms when the Father's going, let's rework this. He wants to reveal himself as the good and beautiful shepherd who gives you peace to be yourself in front of the world. Because you're the best conduit for his presence that he ever gave the world. It's you. So I'm going to make them known through you. They're going to know who he is through you. And he hasn't given up on that vision for your life. Never. So let's space up here. You come if you want to do business with the Father, and we'll pray for you. We'll lay hands on you. Come up here. We're going to go into worship. You can be released. You can leave if you want, but don't go without a touch. And those of you that came up and you got prayed for already, come back up. Keep it going. The Father wants to touch you deeply. He's passionate about you. Come. Jesus, Jesus.